Hello, everybody. I hope I'm live. I've never done this before, so someone tell me if you can hear me or not. Say a comment. I'm hoping so. Yeah, great. Okay, good. Someone there can hear me. Hello. My name's Robin, and I'm going to be talking today about taking the Trans-Siberian Railway up from Moscow to Vladivostok and how I got there and where I went afterwards. And if you have any questions at all at any point, pop them in the box and ask, and I will be delighted to answer you. Any opportunity to talk about my traveling, I'll take it. So however big or small, I'm very open. While you're here, while you're waiting for it to go, don't forget to subscribe to the Adventure Queens YouTube group. They're trying to get more subscribers they get, the more things that they can do, which is super exciting. So if you haven't subscribed already, as the YouTubers say, hit that like button or something. Smash that subscribe button, I believe, is the parlance for young people. I've got some questions that I can answer to start off with. I can also talk more about the trip any point. Essentially, if I'm boring you, ask a question, because otherwise I'm just going to waffle on about what I did, and I could talk forever. So it's in your best interests to make this interactive, to get involved and to ask questions. I have got my cup of tea. I hope you do too. It's might be a long one. So it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to go for it, I think. Hi. Hello. I see the questions. Okay, or at least I see the comments. All right. So I'll explain a little bit about how this came about, how the trip came about. My trip happened in 2015, and I went traveling with my then partner Peter, and we both quit our jobs and went traveling. It was very simple. It was very simple. That's the simple version of what we did. And our plan was to do as much traveling overland as possible. We didn't really want to fly. So back in 2015, it was the climate crisis hadn't sort of quite hit the headlines yet, but it was rumbling in the background. And Peter was very interested in that side of things. So he didn't want to fly because he wanted to just keep his carbon footprint down. And I didn't want to fly because I love overland travel, slow travel, trains in particular. I will get into that a bit more later because I've got a question about why it's much better to go to Vladivostock by train, and I will tell you. But so that was the thinking behind doing this. That was why we started taking this trip, sort of in a more general sense. And the reason that we did this specific part of the trip was that when I was 18, I spent my gap year in China. And in China, I had, in the flat that I lived in, there was a map on the wall, and it was a line map of the world, and it had all the capital cities on there and also some other random cities. And one of the ones on there was Vladivostock. And I found this concept of it fascinating. So I'd never visited Asia before, and then here I was living there. And this city was further east than I was at that point. And I already felt like I couldn't be any further east or any further away from my family in London. And it just blew my mind that there was this city that I'd heard of that was that far away, that was in a country which was partly in Europe. And I just thought one day I have to get to this city. And then randomly, Peter also wanted to visit Vladivostock because he had a bit of an obsession with far-flung, strange places. So naturally, we had to go. So that was why we decided to go to Vladivostock. And when I had appreciated that the Trans-Siberian went there, I was like, I'll have to go by train because I love the train. So that's why we took that particular trip. and I will start answering some of the questions now. So the first question somebody said was, so one of the questions was, how did you get from London to the beginning of the Trans-Siberian? I started thinking about this trip from Moscow, and then I thought, well, if I'm going to go all the way overland from Moscow to Vladivostok, it seems kind of silly to fly to Moscow. I should do all of that bit overland as well. So it started off incredibly unceremoniously with our big backpacks on. We were going to be gone for about 9 months. Literally, we walked out of our flat and walked to Latimer Road Tube Station. That's how it began. Latimer Road Tube Station in London, in Hammersmith, London. And we took so that we could take the Eurostar. We took the Eurostar to Brussels, Brussels to Cologne, Cologne to Berlin. So in London to Berlin in one day. I don't recommend it. That day had to be fast for some reason. I can't remember why now. It was silly. I mean, we did it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Then Berlin to Warsaw, where we spent a few days, and then Warsaw to Minsk in Belarus, and then Belarus to Moscow. Now, this is a piece of advice that I can give you where I messed up. This was the biggest mess up of the journey that we did, of this part anyway. There was more messing up later on. But what I hadn't realised was that you need a visa for Belarus. Back in 2015, pre-referendum, I was naively of the thought that anywhere in Europe you could just go without a visa. I was wrong. And there are different visas that you can get in Belarus, but the most common one is a transit visa. And you can only stay for 24 hours if you have a transit visa. So with the timings of the trains that we had, it meant that we literally were only there for a morning, which was such a shame because I think that Minsk is really interesting. And it's got all of the big Soviet architecture with also really pretty little parks and hardly anyone around. Very odd, and some incredibly lovely people in a hostel that we stayed in the basement of a block of flats with a really creepy swing set outside. So do go, spend more time in Minsk if you can, and if you can't, carefully plan it so that if you've still got your transit visa, plan it so you've got longer. I think it's a really interesting, underrated country, but Russia very much treats it as one of their satellite states, because the Russian visa is checked at the Belarusian border between Poland and Belarus, as opposed to the border between Belarus and Russia. You also need a Russian visa. That's harder to get. I mean, you'll get it, but it requires more of a faff. To get the Belarusian visa, you can get it through Real Russia, which is the best way to get your train tickets as well. But I might answer that later because no one's asked yet about that. But I'm going to assume that you're going to want to know about tickets, so I probably will talk to you about that. Which one should I answer next? What was the most interesting place you stopped off during the Trans-Siberian journey? So this is a good one because I could probably talk positively about all of the places that we went to. And so the time that we had to do this was limited, unfortunately. I had an operation before we left, and that meant that we left later than I would have chosen. And Peter had to be in Melbourne for a wedding, where he flew there from Vladivostok. So we had to be in Vladivostok by a certain point, which meant that we had 3 weeks to get from London to Vladivostok. And just for practical aside here, I said in the introduction video, which you may or may not have seen, that I thought it was like a hop-on, hop-off, that I hoped it would be. I sort of thought it ought to be a hop-on, hop-off journey, and you just buy a ticket to Vladivostok and get off at the places that you want to, but it isn't, of course. You have to specifically buy the tickets in advance. You have to get the ones that you want, the specific trains from A to B to C to D. And I, for various reasons, had to plan it fairly last minute, and I like to keep things open-ended when I'm traveling. I like to be recommended places and see if I like it and hang around, but you can't do that with this trip. You have to plan it in advance. You have to buy the tickets. They sell out months in advance usually. So I did some cursory research, by which I mean literally wiki travel and the Lonely Planet. And I looked at the cities that you could stop at en route, and I tried to get as varied a mix as possible of the ones that looked interesting. So if it's sort of one interesting thing I saw about it. So Nizhny Novgorod was the first place that we stopped off, and it's because it said it had a really nice Kremlin there. And I thought that sounds cool, as good a reason as any. Couldn't find the Kremlin, as it happened. Did find a very nice cafe though, so that was lovely. So that was the kind of reasons that I chose to visit these places. And so the most interesting place that I went to was Lake Baikal, I would say. Now, you guys might be, I hope you are, far more geographically knowledgeable than I am, but I have geography A level, and that means I understand coral ecosystems and have no knowledge of where anything is in the world. And when I was researching, I kept seeing references to Lake Baikal, and I was like, what is this Lake Baikal of which you speak? Never heard of it before. Well, it turns out it's the world's largest lake. And by largest, I don't mean in terms of surface area, but in terms of volume. So the world's most voluminous lake, the deepest lake in the world, and also the oldest lake in the world. And all of these things, one lake that I'd literally never heard of before. And when I had read about the history of the Trans-Siberian, it had they'd had problems. Basically, they'd got to the edge of the lake and then they were stuck. They couldn't get around the lake because it was too mountainous, so they had to go across the lake. They would literally load the trains onto boats, take them across the lake, and then in the winter when it froze over, they would put the rails onto the ice, and then they would take the trains over that way, and then there were hot springs underneath, so the trains would go under. And I was just like, what is this? Like, in my head, I was thinking a lake, like, you know, I'm British, so a lake is Windermere, which is large but not insurmountable. And so I really wanted to go and see this lake. And this is the thing when the timing was slightly constricted, because there's actually an island in the lake which is meant to be really amazing. I think it has a nature reserve on it, and you can do a homestay there. And I really wanted to go there, but we couldn't. The timings of the boats when they left, when the trains were, meant that sadly we couldn't go to this island. And so again, if anyone else is really thinking of doing this trip, please go and tell me how it is, because it's the one reason I would do this again, is to go back and see this island if I can. But so we couldn't go to the island, but I was determined to go to the lake anyway if we could. And the closest town to the lake is Irkutsk, and Irkutsk is where the train splits. So if you keep going to the west, you go to Vladivostock. If you go to the southwest, you go down to Ulaanbaatar, and that's the Trans-Mongolian, or you keep going to Beijing, and that's the Trans-Manchurian. So that's a little bit confusing as well. Again, that's something that I mentioned on the introductory video. Originally, when we talked about the Trans-Siberian, that was that was Moscow to Vladivostok. And then they built the branch line, and technically all three trains, whether you go to Vladivostok, Beijing, or Ulaanbaatar, are all the Trans-Siberian because they all cross Siberia. But these days, when people talk about the Trans-Siberian, they usually mean the one to Vladivostok, which, if you're going to be technical, is the Trans-Russian. So it's a little bit of confusion there. Sorry, I just feel like just clarification there. Anyway, Irkutsk is the point at which the railway splits, and it's also the gateway to Lake Baikal. And I really wanted to do that, so we got off there. Wish I'd spent more time in Irkutsk. I literally went there as the reason to go to the lake, but it's a really amazing city. The architecture was more interesting than any of the towns that we went to. There's a lot of fretwork, really delicate wood carvings on the houses. They're carved. And they're painted different colours, and it reminded me a bit of the American Deep South. And I wish we'd spent more time there, but I literally went there in order to go to the lake. So recommended that you spend a bit more time there if you do this trip. Then we took a minibus from Irkutsk to the lake when I thought I was going to die. We had one of the worst drivers I've ever had in my life. He was barreling through these hills and through the trees, and it snowed very heavily. And I remember thinking, if we come off the road, we're going to crash into a snowdrift and no one knows we're here, and we're going to die and be rediscovered in hundreds of years as anonymous skeletons. Spoiler alert, we didn't die. We made it to Listvianka, which is the little village town on the shores of Lake Baikal, which was originally the starting off point for the trains being taken over the lake, and now is just sort of a little sleepy fishing village. And when we were there, we did the trip in October, which is a real nothing time. Most people would go either height of summer or height of winter. And we were very lucky because it was very cold, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but by that I mean it felt very wintry and it snowed very early, so it was actually really pretty. But there was no one else around. We were there, nothing was open. Like one restaurant which sort of served us. There's a fish omul which is native to Baikal, and if you don't like fish, you're not going to eat anything while you're there. If you don't like that fish, you're in trouble because that's literally all they sell. And we stayed there for 2 days, but the lake itself was astonishing. So we arrived, it was very foggy, it was very low cloud because it was winter, it had been snowing. And we got off the minibus on the edge of the lake and we looked at this lake and it felt like the sea. We couldn't see the other side of it. I thought I was standing if you'd said to me, you're standing at the edge of the sea, I would have believed you. And I just thought this is what it must have felt like for explorers who were coming over from the West, or people who were moving across the country all that time ago. They must have thought they'd reached the Pacific Ocean, because that is how it felt. It's such a vast body of water. And even though it's not the largest in terms of surface area, width-wise, it's wider than the Dover Straits, and lengthwise, it's longer than England. So this lake is the size of a country. And I'd never heard of it. And it made me realize that because Russia is such a vast country, it's only a tiny blip. And that in itself helped me to put into context how big Russia is, how long the Trans-Siberian is, that if this absolutely vast lake, the size of the country I live in, is so forgettable, if you look at it on a map, it's because of the context of the size of the country. And when the clouds cleared the next day, you could see the mountains on the other side, and that was also pretty astonishing because you could see the mountains. And there wasn't an awful lot to do because it was the dead of the tourist season, nothing was happening. But just seeing it, just being there, it was a great place to go. And although we had to come off the train and take a bus there and take a bus back, I would really recommend making that detour to Lake Baikal if you possibly can. The next stage of the railway goes to Ulan-Ude, which is sort of on the other side of the lake. It takes about 6 hours to get there. If you take the Mongolian or Manchurian, you're not going to do that next bit, so you won't see any of the lakes. So certainly if you want to take the Trans-Mongolian, you should make that effort to go to the lake, because otherwise you won't see it at all. And I really think it's a fantastic, really fascinating place to see. This is a very long answer. See, I told you I will just bang on unless you ask me another question. So somebody has asked, why would you recommend your way of reaching Vladivostock over flying? Which is a great question. And I do feel a bit like, right, let me tell you about slow travel. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that taking the Trans-Siberian at all is an experience, which I think if you enjoy train travel, you want to do it. If you enjoy long travel, it's one of those things you have to do. You know what I mean? It's on a lot of people's bucket lists, I think. Don't get it confused with the Orient Express, because a lot of people have done that when they talk to me about it and they think it's this really luxurious train. It is not luxurious. Like, do not get it wrong. They technically have first class, but first class is just second class, but you get the carriage to yourself. So the classes that you get are, you get Platzkart, which is the completely open carriage that you're sharing. If you, like me, cut your teeth traveling in China, then you would recognize that as hard sleep. On the local Chinese trains, it's completely open. You've got the bunks. The difference is that the trains are wider than the Chinese ones. So if you're walking along the corridor, you've got beds sort of that way, and you've also got beds that way as well, if that makes sense, on both sides. So it's very cramped, but there's lots of camaraderie. There's lots of there's lots of friendliness. There's lots of smells. So that's Platzkart. Then you have, or third class. Then you have second class, which is you get a cabin with, I guess that cabin, is that the right word? With 4 bunks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you book 1 or 2, whatever seat you're going on, and you're going to be sharing with strangers, but only 2 or 3 strangers. And then you've got first class, which is the same cabin, but you get the whole thing to yourself. So you booked it for yourself. Sometimes they don't even have the top bunks. Sometimes they do, but they're just not used. So those are the different classes that you can get. And it's up to you how which ones you choose. I would have gone in Platzkart, which is the open one, but my my then partner, he was not so keen on. He valued his privacy more than I did. I mean, you don't get any privacy on in third class. So if you so that's how you can do it. That's which one you want to do. Then so I am still on the why question. You can go non-stop from Moscow to Vladivostock, and a lot of people do. And I think that the reason that they do that is really to say that they have. It's the longest train journey in the world. It's 7 days and 6 nights, I believe, non-stop. And if you go in Platzkart, you're going to make a lot of friends, and people are going to take you in, and it's going to be wonderful, and that's awesome. But there's not a whole lot more to it than that. For a large part of the train journey, the scenery is very samey. It's when you're going through Siberia, it's a lot of nothingness. It's fascinating if you come from a country as built up as the UK, because you just don't get it. You don't get these stretches of nothingness like you do there. I've traveled through a few countries like that. I've traveled in China and in Mongolia and in Russia that all have these vast swathes of nothingness, and certainly Russia's the one that you would go for the longest without seeing much. And what you get in China, in Russia as well, that's amazing, is that you can be going along through the nothingness and then suddenly a city will appear, and it'll literally come from nowhere. You'll just be staring at the Siberian steppes at 1 minute, and then suddenly you look down to read a book, and you look up and you're in a city, and it'll be a city that you've never heard of before, but it'll have a population of 1 million people. And that blew my mind. And if you fly to Vladivostok, you will never see that those places exist. You won't know that there are these cities with people who are living their lives the same as you are, wherever you live, from birth to death in that place, and you will never know that they existed or that that city existed. And I think that's important. I think we should know these things, even if you don't have the time to go to all of those places. Simply knowing that they exist is a good step. I also think that overland travel generally, this is a more general thing, really helps us to put our lives into context. I think if you get on a plane and it's a very sterile thing to do. You get on the plane in the place that you live, and then you get off in the place that you've arrived, and it really feels very separate. There's no connection there. There's no context. You don't feel, you don't understand how you've got there. You don't understand how things changed or how they were similar, because it feels so foreign, because it is, and there's absolutely nothing to join them together. Whereas if you can do overland travel, you see the vegetation change, you hear the languages change, you see the look of people change. You see the customs change, and it's a gradual thing. It's very rarely a sudden change. It's much more gradual, and it really helps us to understand our place in the world, and feel like we're more together than separate. And that's why I love overland travel, and why I wanted to do this train journey. Now, the weird thing about doing this is that the geography, the vegetation and stuff that I was talking about is very samey all the way along. But I loved checking on my map as I was going along to see where I was in terms of, I'm doing that because it was in terms of northern. So I'd be like, oh, right now I'm north of Afghanistan, and now I'm north of India, and now I'm north of Mongolia, now I'm north of Beijing. And it was incredible to see as you were to see that's where we were. Also, if you do it slowly, you go through the time zones slowly as well. So you cover 7 time zones in Russia from Moscow to Vladivostok. And obviously, if you do one time zone every few days, it's actually, you adjust surprisingly easily than if you have to suddenly jump 7 hours overnight. And there really is nothing that I will never forget the feeling of one of the final morning when we woke up. So the last train that we took was from Ulan-Ude to Vladivostok. That was the last train we took, and it's a long train. There's a good reason that people choose the Trans-Mongolian over the Trans-Russian, and that's because the final leg of the scenery is much more interesting. The final leg of scenery from of the Trans-Russian to Vladivostok not that great. I get it. I really do. I think if you choose the Trans-Russian over the Trans-Mongolian or the Trans-Manchurian, it's because you really want to go to Vladivostok. Like, there's not really a whole other reason to do that. If you are 100% in it for the scenery, go to Beijing. Like, I knew that I was going to see that scenery coming back the other way. I was very lucky. I was going on a long trip and I was going to come back from the south to the north. So I saw it anyway. I just did it in a loop. So yeah, that last train journey was 52 hours, and it had been a long night. We'd met some absolutely bonkers Russian people who worked on the railway on Sakhalin Island, which is this, if you look at a map, it's a massive island to the really far east of Russia, which again, probably never heard of, but it's absolutely vast island. And they've been working on the railways there, and they were taking this last bit of the railway with us. And they got onto our carriage, and they cracked open the vodka, and they were drinking so heavily, and they were trying to make Peter drink, not so much me, because it's still a fairly patriarchal country, and for better or worse, I was not invited to partake. So they were getting increasingly drunk, and at one point they got off the station, they bought us a chicken, they bought us a fish, and one of the guys started brandishing this massive knife, which really freaked me out. And then it turned out that he sort of carved the fish with it. And it was a very dramatic night. It was very interesting. Those are also the kind of stories that you get. If you flew, you wouldn't be meeting these people. This is just one group of people that we met. It happened to be on the last night that we were there. And they left. They got off a couple of stops before Vladivostok. So they left at about sort of 5 o'clock in the morning or something. And we were just sitting in this carriage. It was the only time actually that we had it to ourselves, because they'd gone, and it just felt very quiet and quite a little bit hungover, I think. And I was looking out of the window, and then suddenly the sea appeared. It was just there. And I'd been traveling, I'd gone under the sea, under the Atlantic, the English Channel part of the Atlantic. And then I'd been traveling for 3 weeks. And then suddenly here was the sea, and it was the Bay of Amur, I think it is, which is part of the Sea of Japan, which is part of the Pacific Ocean. And I just, going from the most landlocked part of the world to going to this was utterly blew my mind. And then looking out of the window, I could see Vladivostok. It was hanging on the edge of a cliff, and in my head I sort of thought it was a bit like a fishing village, but no, it was a city, and it was there. And seeing it come closer and knowing the way that we'd come just put it into context and how far away it really, really was. And that is why I would do it over land instead of flying. It's a very long answer. I will just talk, I think, about the practicalities of booking the tickets, because I think that's probably quite helpful if you want to do it. I'm assuming that you guys are all you want to know the real how to do it, because you're going to go away from this talk and you'll be like, oh my god, this is so fascinating. As soon as the pandemic's over, I'm going to Vladivostock. Yeah, that's what I want you all to do. So how do you do it? Well, there are basically, if you're sensible, if you're a good traveler, obviously first you will get your visas. And the Russian visa is a bit of a pain. At least it was in 2015. You had to do your fingerprints. You had to provide proof of staying in a hotel every night. You had to provide proof of employment. If you were self-employed or not employed, you had to have £100 in your bank account for every night that you're staying. It's not a simple process, but that's because classically Britain made it really hard for the Russians to get visas to come here. So then they retaliated and made it really hard for us. And if you're living in Inverness and thinking, God, I don't really want to go all the way to London to give my fingerprints, people who live in Vladivostok have to go to Moscow to give their fingerprints if they want to come and visit the UK. So, perspective. Anyway, so yeah, get your visas first. And then if you're buying your tickets, you've essentially got 3 ways of doing this. The cheapest way is to book it through the National Rail website of Russia, the equivalent of the National Rail website, the name of which has temporarily escaped me, but you will find it easily enough. And they didn't have an English website, I think, when I did it. They do now. it looks like it's going to be really easy to use because the website's very slick, it's very modern, but actually you have to know exactly what you want. It's really fiddly. You can do it, but it's a faff. It's not simple. Yeah, that's the cheapest way of doing it. As ever, the hardest way, but it can be done if you really want to. The most expensive way to do it, but the simplest, is to get a tour operator to book it, and they will do the whole thing. You tell them when you're leaving, you tell them when you're arriving, they'll book all of the tickets, they'll book all of the hotels. I remember when I was booking this that my parents had some magazines lying around with like some of those ones that have like adverts at the back, like, book this trip, do this thing. And at the time they were selling a trip on the Trans-Siberian for £3,000 per head, not including flights. And when I did it, the pound was very strong and the ruble was very weak, so we did have a very good exchange rate, but we did the whole thing in second class, not including hotels, but they were really cheap, for 350. So that's the price discrepancy that you're looking at, literally 10 times the price if you want someone to do it for you, but they'll do it for you. And then the nice middle ground, which is what we did, is to use an online booking system, and the best one by far is Real Russia. Just Google it and you'll find the website, and then there's a bar along the top, and you can choose Trans-Siberian Planner, and it's fantastic. It's such a well-designed website. I'm not paid by them, I just think they're great. You choose, I want to leave Moscow on the 1st of September, I want to go to Vladivostock, and then it gives you or Beijing or Ulaanbaatar. And then it gives you a list of all of the cities that you can stop at on the way. And you just select the cities that you want to stop at. So in my case, I stopped at Nizhny Novgorod, Perm, Yekaterinburg, Krasnoyarsk, Irkutsk, and Ulan-Ude. So that was 6 cities that we stopped at. And so you select that, and then it takes you to the next page, and then the first bit, so we'll say give you all of the trains that go between Moscow and Nizhny Novgorod on that first day, and you look at all the ones that are there, and it gives you're going to have to do a lot of cross-referencing, but it'll tell you like how long they are, what time they arrive, whether that train's got first class, whether it's got a dining cart, whether it's got single-sex cabins, that kind of thing. It has all of the information there, and you'll get used to choosing it. And if you're actually, no, I think I want to stay an extra day in Moscow, I'm just going to, at the bottom, you just, shift the date by 1 day, and it'll give you the new trains. It's and you'll see, and as you go through and you choose each leg of the journey, it will give you your itinerary will appear on the website as you book it. So you can see how you're doing, how long each train is doing. It's just such a user-friendly interface, and essentially what you pay is I'm not sure if it's a percentage or if it's a flat rate, but it's fairly small. And my memory is that it was around about 10% of the cost of the tickets that we paid on top to use that website, and like it was worth every penny. I actually tested it out the other day to see if anything had changed. I think if anything, it's better, it's smoother than it was when I did it before. And I did it for literally in a few days' time. Tickets were available because of the pandemic, not because normally you shouldn't, because I literally was doing it for like leaving today. You wouldn't normally be able to do that. But last minute tickets of ones that were available, and I was able to do it for like £450. So that's obviously a lot more. But I think if you were booking in advance and you were going for the cheaper tickets that were still available, you could definitely get it down. So that's sort of still the kind of price that you're looking at. Less than £500 to go from here to from London to Vladivostok, even if you were leaving tomorrow and you didn't have as many options available to you. So that's the practice. Oh yeah, sorry. Also with Real Russia, what's really good is that they will give you the tickets. You'll get sent the tickets which are written in Russian and will be in Moscow time. Big thing there, you need to be aware of 3 time zones at all times. There's Moscow time, which is the time that the trains run on. So all of the train times are done in Moscow time. Then you're going to have the time of the place that you've left, which is just what your body clock is operating on. And then there's the time of the place that you're going to be getting off at, which is probably a different time to the one that you got on at. So you've got 3 different time zones at any one time in your head. I had multiple clocks on my phone to keep track of it. But what they will do, Real Russia, is they'll give you an itinerary which is in English and has the local times on there as well. So you can make sure that you're getting on the right train because you've got the tickets that have that time, but you can like decide how long you're going to be in that town for because it's giving you in local time. So it's super helpful. It doesn't mean that you're faffing around less. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. So yeah, and they will, and I mentioned them earlier because they will also sort your visas. They'll do the Belarusian one. They'll also do the Russian one. I only know that they do the Belarusian one because I literally realized 2 days before leaving that we hadn't got Belarusian visas and we needed to do it. And they expedited it for me. And on the day before I was leaving from a 9-month trip, I was running through Islington to their head offices because they're like, "Give me my visa." So yeah, that's Real Russia. They're cool. So what was there next? Oh yes, okay. What did you do after South Korea? Oh right, so I didn't, and so I mentioned this in my chat, but I haven't mentioned it here. When I got to Vladivostock, I didn't want to just fly somewhere else if I could avoid it. And it turns out that you can take a ferry to Japan or you can take a ferry to Korea. And various reasons, I decided to go to Korea. And so I did. I took a ferry to Donghai and I spent 3 weeks traveling around Korea and ending up in Seoul, where I had to fly from, which was awesome. After Seoul, I'll just give a very quick précis of this because I could rabbit on for ages, but I flew via Tokyo for a few nights to Bali, where I met my then partner, and we traveled across Bali and across Java. Then unfortunately, we had to fly from Jakarta to Singapore. Then we went overland from Singapore to through Malaysia, then up through Malaysia. We couldn't go to Borneo because it was typhoon season. It was bad. So we unfortunately had to stay to the mainland. Overland through Thailand, then overland through Burma, Myanmar. And then to get your Burmese visa, you have to have flights out, or you did them. So we had to fly. We flew from Yangon to Hong Kong, and then we went overland into China, then through China, and then overland into Mongolia, through Mongolia, and then we had planned on coming back through Central Asia, but a couple of things thwarted us. One, you can get into Kazakhstan without a visa if you're British. Again, you could then. I feel like everything I'm saying about visas, for the love of God, check it. Don't rely on what I'm saying. This is all 2015, 2016 information. But you could get into Kazakhstan, but then you couldn't get to the other stans without a visa. And to do that, you have to give up your passport for like 6 weeks and provide a full itinerary. And we just didn't have time to do that. More importantly, I did not check my passport to make sure that I had space in it. Now, everyone will tell you, check it to make sure that you've got enough time on it. And obviously I did that. I had like 5 years left on it. So I knew that was fine. But did I ever think to check that I had enough pages? No, I did not. Check it. This has never happened to me. It'll never happen again, I suspect. But I literally finished my passport. I had 1 blank page left. And I had to leave it and I knew that if I'd used that to get into Kazakhstan, I couldn't get any further. So we had to leave. We had to leave China, and we flew from Beijing to Bucharest, and then we went back through Europe. And now, if I try and remember which countries we went through, it's going to be really tough. But I think it was Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia. Slovakia, no, before that, after that, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, France, and then back to the UK. I probably missed, Hungary, that was there as well. Probably missed something else. I mean, there's a whole load more there that we can talk about too. And again, it was border issues. The biggest one, I wanted to go to Macedonia. I wanted to go to Kosovo. They were not easy ones to get into. We literally turned up at the station, the railway station in Niš, which is in Serbia, with the intention of taking the train from Niš to Skopje. And they were like, no, there's no train. And we were like, oh, when's the next one? And they went, in about 6 months. And it turned out that they were fixing the railway. As in, like, the one railway line was being fixed, and no one had put up any signs. It didn't say it anywhere. To be fair, I think we hadn't checked online probably, but check that before you go to the station. So we didn't go to Kosovo, and we couldn't get in, to Macedonia, and we couldn't get into Kosovo because there was a lot of political, probably still, I imagine, political tension with Serbia that they don't recognise. If you travel into Kosovo from another border, you have to go in there from Serbia because they don't consider you have coming into Serbia. Like, how have you got into Serbia? You haven't got a Kosovo. That doesn't count. That's not, that's part of us. It's all very complicated. So you have to check that as well. But yeah, we didn't take very many flights, and we did manage to get home without flying once we got to Bucharest. So that was great. I don't know if there are any other specific questions that you want to ask about this trip. I definitely have more stories that I can share, but I don't want to be boring you with information that you already have. So you can comment in the live chat if you have questions that you would like to ask. Oh, Laura's got lots. Okay, I'm gonna have some tea from my monkey mug. Oh, you can't see that. My mug is a monkey. It's so cute. Oh, what is Korea like? Oh, good question. Korea was probably one of my favorite countries that I visited on the trip. Korea or Mongolia. If you ask me which countries were my favorite on the trip, Korea and Mongolia would both have equal parts to play. Korea is fascinating because most people arrive in Seoul or Busan, which is the second city, and then a lot of people tend to travel from Seoul and take and stay in Seoul because there's a lot of the bullet train basically is really, really effective in Korea, and because it's so fast, a lot of people will just base themselves in Seoul and then travel day trips out to cities that they can get to from Seoul. But I really don't like doubling back on myself if I can avoid it, and I like to keep moving. And I'd rather live out of a bag anyway, really. So I went to Donghai, and then I briefly popped north to go to, I can't remember where I went to there, small town Sokcho. And then I sort of went anti-clockwise back down and up back to Seoul. And so Seoul was actually the last place that I went in Korea, which was a good thing because I think a lot of people will base their opinions of Korea on Seoul. Whereas by the time I got there, I'd been there for almost 3 weeks already. And I already had a very strong opinion in my mind of what Korea was like. And Seoul is only a very small part of that. So my memories of Korea are much more small towns and more rural. I went hiking more, and mostly the food, which was phenomenal. And in Korea, they don't really understand eating alone. It's just not a thing that you do in Korea. And so a lot of the places I would go there, I would turn up at the door of the restaurant and be like, oh, table for one, like the only thing I could say in Korean. And they'd all just be like, no. And they'd sort of do the similar thing. They do a similar thing in China as well. And I'd be like busy undoing my shoes because you have to take off your shoes for a lot of restaurants, and then really embarrassing me in front of like literally all the diners. I'd just be like tying my shoes up and like, oh, sorry to bother you. Let's put my shoes back on and head on out. And so yeah, they just like literally wouldn't serve me. But then in other places they did, and I think they felt sorry for me. And one of the main reasons that they don't understand serving fewer than 2 people is because a lot of meals in Korea are designed for sharing, and especially the little side plates. You get all the loads of little side plates. You might know that if you've been to Korean restaurants in the UK or somewhere else, you'll get like kimchi and maybe a couple of other pickled things. But they're like, oh my God, one restaurant I went to, I had 20 side dishes. 20, I'm not joking. 2020, and so they would bring you the little side dishes, and they'd just be like, well, we can't halve this, like this is what we would do for 2 people, and I'd be a bit like, like Joey, like, oh, you're gonna see something special. I never left any food. So those poor people, they were really shocked. I was just like, no, watch me, I am gonna eat all this myself, and I always did. So but they were so friendly and super lovely. And a lot of the time in these restaurants, when I was on my own, they were clearly mortified that this random woman was eating on her own. So they would come and sit with me, even if we couldn't talk, and we would have a lovely time, even if we couldn't chat. And so I have memories of being looked after incredibly well in Korea, which was fantastic. So I really liked Korea. Mostly for the food, not just because there was so much of it, but that probably did help. That was, actually, so Laura's also asked what countries had your favorite food. Korea. Again, just definitely Korea and Japan are my favorites of everything, and Thailand, of course, but like, I mean, it's such an obvious one. And Indonesia too. Oh my god, like, it's all of I just love Asian food. I really do. If you go to Malaysia, you can go to Georgetown, Penang, and that's where they're famous for street food, and my god, it's brilliant. And having also, so when I lived in China, I lived in the south of China, which is Cantonese, and that's where dim sum is from. So I am a dim sum aficionado. I take it very seriously. I get very upset when it's eaten at the wrong time of day, and people call things dim sum that isn't dim sum. But in Malaysia, they have their Malaysian version of it, because they have such a massive community of Chinese people, especially from Hainan, I think it is, where they have dim sum as well. And it's amazing because it's Malaysian. Thanks colonialism, a lot of the stuff's written in English, so you get all of the authentic Chinese food, but you can actually read what's being said if you don't speak Chinese. So if you are a fan of Chinese food, but you're intimidated by menus that are written in Chinese characters, Malaysia is the place for you. I really recommend that. It was awesome. Burmese food was probably my least favorite of all of the places I went to. Oh no, actually that's not true. Burmese was my second worst. Mongolian was probably the worst, to be fair. In Mongolia, Mongolia was an incredible country. No one's asked what else were my favorite countries. I'm just going to tell you anyway. So having just raved about Korea, which was awesome, I'm also just going to take this opportunity to rave about Mongolia because it is brilliant. And also just to say, if you take the Trans-Manchurian trains, take it full circle to the trains again. If you take the Trans-Manchurian, you're going to go from Irkutsk down to Beijing, and you're probably not going to stop off very much on the way, apart from at Ulaanbaatar. I don't think there is no other way to stop in Mongolia. There's literally Ulaanbaatar's it. You stop there and then you keep going to Beijing. And Mongolia is such a fascinating country in and of its own right. I feel like you're not doing it justice if you just cut straight through and you just stop at the capital city. Mongolia is like nowhere else on earth. It is the least populated country in the world, and it feels that way. When I was there, that's 2016, when I was there, they had just completed the roads, which were, so you've got Ulaanbaatar kind of in the middle, not really, I've heard it. Yes, Natural. I'll answer your question in just a second. I just want to randomly ramble on until then. You've got the AMAGs, which are the provinces, and they're out to the side, and you've got the roads that go from Ulaanbaatar to the AMAG capitals, and that's it. That's literally got like 7 roads in Mongolia, and that's basically it. And so you have to hire a driver. This is the only way to do it, because to travel around, you are literally traveling across the Gobi Desert, or the Mongolian steppes. You're literally in the middle of nowhere. If you want to do it yourself, it's not a road. You're not on a road. It's literally just, sometimes there are tracks. You can see the tracks of cars, and sometimes it's literally just, you're just driving across nothingness, with absolutely nothing to guide you. And we hired a driver, and he didn't even have a GPS. He would literally get out of the car and just sort of look around, and there'd be like some tiny range of mountains on the horizon, and he'd be like, we're going that way. And then we'd say, when are we going to stop to eat? And he'd be like, we're going to reach a village in 25 minutes. And we would reach a village in 25 minutes. And it was just absolutely astonishing. It was like, he just knew it. He knew it literally at the back of his hand. It was absolutely incredible. Nadia asked, I've heard Ulaanbaatar is super polluted. Did you find that? Actually, no, but that is because I was there in April, and April, again, this was an accident. Again, it was a dead month. April is in the guidebooks as the least good month to go. And the reason it's the month that you're not recommended to go is that it is so incredibly windy. And the good thing about it being so incredibly windy was that it literally blew the pollution away. So as it happens, when I was there, it wasn't that polluted, but I think it is the rest of the year. I think April, if you're prepared to put up with the winds, if you've got a good strong hair tie, then the benefit is that it's not wind, it's not polluted, but you are like being buffeted sideways. It's like all that you do. The other good thing about going in April, and I mean, we literally didn't know this, like I cannot actually express how little research we did for so much of this trip. Like it was a case of a lot of the stuff was literally like looking at a map going, might as well go there next. And it wasn't until we arrived in Ulaanbaatar that we looked at the guidebook and it said don't go in April, and we were like, well, crap, it's April now. But so everything was shut, and we thought this is going to be a really big problem. As it happened, it was the best thing ever, because when we went off with our driver, he was like, he didn't really speak much English, and he was saying, so he was basically trying to explain to us, though, that normally people would stay in the tourist camps, which are like, they're sort of concrete blocks essentially that are built in the desert, and you go there and they've got like a toilet and running water and stuff, but pretty basic, and not particularly atmospheric, but it's somewhere to sleep. But because we were there, because we were there in a month when there were literally no tourists, the tourist camps weren't open, and so we had to stay with nomadic families in the middle of the desert. And they were like, sorry, you have to stay with them. And we were like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And we were literally staying with nomadic Mongolian families in their yurts, or in Mongolia they're called gers, but the word yurt is more well known. And most of those families would have two. They'd have one that they stayed in, and then they'd have a guest ger. And we would stay with the ones that were known. The people, our driver knew them, and we would just turn up, and they would feed us, and we would sleep there, and the next morning we would go. And these girls, and it was just breathtaking. Like, I know that word gets thrown around, but there's no other way to describe it. We stayed in the first night that we stayed in one, and it was just this endless steppe. There was nothing to be seen apart from these two girls that were just in the middle of it and their camels. And that's where we stayed overnight. And another night we stayed in the shadow of some mountains, and another night we stayed near the massive sand dune there. And everywhere we went, there were no people, there were no tourists. And we went to we went on a fairly basic trip, really. There's like sort of 5 places that you can go in Mongolia that are really awesome. They're pretty famous, like the Flaming Cliffs and the giant sand dune, and frozen ice lakes and stuff. And we went to all of them, and there was literally nobody there. And you sort of think in any other country in Europe or in America or whatever, there would be a cash register and a queue and bouncers and and a gift shop. And like here, it was hard to, we didn't even know where to go. Like we'd literally the driver would just stop the car and be like, we're here. And we'd be like, where are we? And he'd go, oh, just walk that way and you'll see something nice. And then you'd come out and it would be like these multicolored stripy cliffs. And it would just be the like looking at the Grand Canyon, and there's just no one else around. And you feel like going, do they know this is here? Because this is awesome. This is cool. No, anyone? So I just take a picture. Yeah. And that was Mongolia, and probably the best experience of my entire trip was in Mongolia. when we were driving along one day, and our driver said, he was just driving and he just went, "Would you like to see picture?" And generally speaking, when I'm traveling, I'll say yes to anything because, might miss out, massive FOMO. And so I was like, yeah, obviously. Cool. And I thought that he meant it was going to be scenery, like a really nice vista, and we would take a photo. We just sort of veered off to the right and went to this kind of rocky outcrop, stopped the car, we got out, we started climbing up this thing, and it was very rocky, so we were climbing up it, and some of it was like using our hands to really kind of have to pull our way around the side, and we were going around the edge and up a bit more. And then, and eventually just suddenly he just stopped and he just went, "Picture." And I looked at it, and it was like a cave painting. It was a rock carving in the rock, and it was a very distinctive, very sort of stylized. It was a horse or a deer, and it had a very stylized, very long nose. And I was just looking at this like this should be in a museum. Like my typically British colonial approach was just like, cut it out, put it under glass, charge to get there. And so I was like taking photos, like, this is amazing. Like, okay, cool. And he was just like, yeah, cool, picture, enjoying it. And then we left. It was amazing. And a few days later, we went to Karakoram, which is Genghis Khan's seat where he used to live. And there's a museum there, the National Museum of Mongolia, and we turned up there at about 5 o'clock. The museum closed at 5:30, and Peter wasn't that into museums. I really was, so I was like, I'm just going to dash around it and just like quickly look around. And as we barely walked in there, and this man came running towards us. And I was like, I'm so sorry. We're gonna go. I'm gonna go really quickly. I know you're about to close. And he was like, no, please, take as long as you want. Can I take you around this museum? And he was actually the director of the museum, the director of the National Museum of Mongolia. And he was like, would you like a guided tour? So I was going, yeah, yes, I would. Yes, I would very much like a guided tour, please. And so he took me around the museum and personally explained everything in this museum, because we were basically the first people who'd come into this museum in weeks. They were so excited to see people in the museum. And we were going around, which is awesome. And then we got to this bit, which was rock carvings. And he was explaining to us, he was saying, they're unique to Mongolia. It's very, very special. And he said, and he was like, "This is it's very unique to this region because it's this very stylized nose and it's this deer." And I said, "Oh, what, you mean like this one?" And it's like scrolled through my phone, and I was like, "You mean like this?" And he just looked at it and he went, "What? When did you see that?" And I was like, "Oh, like a few days ago. So our driver showed us. Is it old?" And he said, "About 6,000 years." And I was like, "Cool. Okay then." And that was it, and that was the exchange, and that's Mongolia. That is Mongolia in a nutshell. That the director of the National Museum was seeing for the first time on my phone pictures of rock carvings which the local people knew about, but the museum directors didn't. And for the life of me, I couldn't have told him where it was. We could never have gone back there again. That's why I love Mongolia. It's a really long story, sorry, but I can't recommend it strongly enough. It's a really awesome country. Laura asked, what did you do on your return back to normal jobs, or has it changed your idea of what you wanted to do? Yeah, it did change. It did change my idea. So whilst we were traveling, Peter said that he didn't want to go back to London, which is where I'm from. So I'm born and brought up in sorry, Nadia's just said, "You've convinced me I was put off when you said bad food." Oh yeah, I was going to start talking about the food, and then I just got distracted by saying what an amazing country it is. But really, the food is so bad. I can't tell you, because especially I think maybe if you go during the touristy season, it's better. But you're staying with these families, and literally all you've got is is meat, nondescript meat. Maybe it's camel, maybe it's horse, maybe it's mutton. It's usually mutton. and you can't, if you're a vegan, you are screwed. And just, we used to, Peter and I used to laugh about this time when we were going there, because they, the direct translation of noodles is flour, like, I guess because they're made of flour. So you would get the option of flour and meat, or rice and meat, and that was it. And we were in a restaurant one time, like this one time we stopped in a town, and there was a restaurant, and we were like, oh my god, we can eat here, and this is so exciting, we're not going to have to eat, like, you know, the same thing that we've been eating for the last week. And our driver Tushar was translating the menu for us, and he was going, rice and meat, flour and meat, rice and egg. And we were like, oh my god, rice and egg, this is a vegetarian. He was like, and meat. So everything has meat in it. If you, so yeah, now you don't eat meat. Like, honestly, I genuinely don't know what you do. Like, if you went there during higher tourist season, it's quite possible that they are used to us Westerners and our funny vegetarian ways. But certainly then, I don't really eat that much meat now. Thankfully, I was still eating it then, because we would have starved to death. It was, if you like rice, I mean, you're going to eat a lot of rice. You could eat a lot of rice, you'll be fine. And you don't get eggs out in the Gers, but you get them in the towns more. They keep chicken there. So yeah, if you like rice, you'd probably be fine. But was I started saying, oh yeah, so Laura was asking, what did I do when I got back to normal jobs? So yeah, so Peter said he didn't want to move back to London, and I'm from London. I had always lived there at that point, and it hadn't occurred to me to live anywhere else. But when he said that, it was interesting, because I felt like we'd already taken the first step. We'd already quit our jobs and gone and got away from our friends and family. So it didn't really feel like that much of a step to say, okay, well, we'll live somewhere else. And having traveled through so many countries and cities and towns, it really made me conscious that I probably shouldn't go back and just live in the same place that I'd always lived in before. Maybe I should try living somewhere else. And unfortunately, like, what we had talked about was moving somewhere in Europe. Unfortunately, we got back just before the referendum. Like, we got back in time to campaign for Remain, obviously. And we, obviously, when we didn't go through, we were just like, well, what are we going to do now? Like, can we move, if we move to Europe, to the continent, are we going to then be chucked out? Are we not going to be able to stay there anymore? We should probably look to buy a place in the UK. So that's what we did. And I'd always had this idea that I wanted to open a guest house, to run a guest house or a bed and breakfast. And I had thought that I would do it when I was older. I kind of thought I'd have a conventional career and then retire early and open a guest house. And essentially I was like, actually, why do I need to do that? I don't need to wait till I retire. I could do that now. I have a lot of experience with traveling, and I know what guests want, so I can provide it. So that's what I did. Moved to York, and I opened a guest house, and you can stay here. Hashtag advertising. The Purple Door in York. Actually, right now you can't, because I'm still close to the pandemic. I don't think it's a good time to open up again, but in theory. And that's taken me in a different direction. I'm sort of now looking to go in a different direction from there. But if I'd gone back to London, it wouldn't have been the same. And if I hadn't gone traveling, I might still be working my old job. I used to work in the film industry, and I don't want to go back there. And one of the reasons that I wanted to leave was it felt very superficial. And it was a lot of people who thought they were more experienced and more worldly than they were. And I wanted to actually experience the world, and I felt a bit more like I had done. I'd still like to live abroad, but will I be allowed to? I don't know. So that's what I did next. And I mean, I should have left my job a long time ago. It's one of these classic things. I am speaking from a position of privilege. I am very, very conscious of this fact. I know that I was able to do this. I was very lucky. I was able to save up money. I had support. I had a flat in London, which I was able to rent out when we went traveling. So I was able to earn money that way. And not everyone has that. I'm super conscious of that. So I'm sitting here saying like, oh my God, quit your job, go traveling. and you may not have the resources to do that, and I'm fully aware of it. If you are able to do it, obviously, I massively recommend it. There is a very good reason why people who don't know what they're doing just quit their job and go traveling, because it's an incredible, not only is it an amazing opportunity to do it, but it really does reset your mind, and it gives you a different perspective on life. Like, I know that I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. This is not new information. But it really did. It's a massive cliche. And I don't mean in terms of like, I found myself when I was traveling. I don't mean anything like that. I just mean you just look at life in a different way. And back to what I was saying before about it being a holistic experience and connectivity. When you do travel around like that, especially overland, and you just feel like you understand your place in the world a bit more, the big things and the small things that you can do. And I personally think that's really important. And it's been pretty awesome as well, because I've had people to come and stay in my guest house who have come from places that I have been to. And certainly living in Yorkshire, I have found that people maybe are a little less well-travelled than in London, just because London's such an international, cosmopolitan, transient population. People are coming and going from all over the place, just a little bit less so in York. And so a lot of people would come here from some of the places I've been to and be surprised that I've been there, which is cool. So I enjoy that when I say, yes, I have been to Penang in Malaysia. I have. It's excellent. I liked the noodles. Yeah, a different perspective on things. And again, that's the same, talking about privilege again, that's the same for overland travel, for long distance things. Again, if you have the time to travel, if you have the time to go overland to Vladivostock, awesome. If you have a burning desire to visit Vladivostock and you don't have 3 weeks to get there, fair. Like, a lot of jobs are not going to give you that time off. But if you have 2 weeks and you like train travel, then why not take the train to Vladivostock and do it that way and then fly back? Why not make that your trip? It's not conventional, but it's a different way of doing it. It's looking at the journey. The journey is the destination, whatever that naff expression is. But there's truth to it, people. The traveling is wonderful. If you want if you like overland travel and you like train travel, and that's piqued your interest, some of the other train journeys I've done that I really recommend. Further away, the train up to Shimla. So you've got the toy train up to Shimla in India, from which is the very, very narrow gauge railway. That's pretty well known, but fantastic. You've got the Death Railway, which is obviously steeped in deeply unpleasant history, but it is an incredible journey to see, and you learn about the railway, and you will learn about it more there, which goes over the bridge over the River Kwai, and that's in Thailand. The train in Java, that's another bit of overland travel that I really recommend. If you're going to Bali, or if you like Bali, go to Java, which is next door, the island next door, about 45 minutes on the ferry. There's a train that goes from Banyuwangi, I think it is, on the east coast of Java. So when you take the ferry over from Bali to Java, and then you can take a train to Malang, which is the old Dutch capital in Java. And that's one of the best train journeys I've ever taken. And it sets off at about 5 o'clock in the morning. So you go through sunrise, and it's a knackered old train. Like, you're literally sitting on benches on this train, and there are literally like volcanoes silhouetted outside against as the sky is rising. And we met a lovely guy on there who had come from his parents' farm and had fresh mangoes and just gave us mangoes. And my memory of that is just sitting there eating mangoes and taking the train there. So that's another good one. Those are all Asian ones. Closer to home, one of the nicest train journeys I've ever taken was from Zagreb to Vienna. That's awesome. That is a really incredible journey that you can take. And also an accidental train that we took on this trip when we were trying to get to Grenoble in France, and we were in Milan, and there was a train strike. I can't remember who was striking, but it must have been France. And basically we couldn't get the train from Milan to Grenoble, which we needed to do because that's where our Eurostar was going back from. And we ended up having to take a train instead from Milan to Geneva. So again, this is a fairly well-known train, I think, but I'd never even considered taking it because I had no desire to go to Switzerland. I didn't want to go to Geneva. But it turns out that train journey from Milan to Geneva is absolutely stunning. And it goes around the outside of Lake Geneva and it goes past the Matterhorn and it is gorgeous. And it's like a day's worth of train travel and it was completely unexpected. I didn't think it was going to happen. It was right at the end of the trip. And I remember thinking, there is so much in Europe still to see. I mean, I love traveling in Europe. I love traveling by train and bus in Europe, and there's an awful lot to see and do in Asia. And there's an awful lot more that I've only scratched the surface. But certainly in recent years, I've realised you don't need to go that far afield. You can see some just really stunning stuff without going very far at all. What's Laura saying? What can one do in Vladivostock when you get there, by the way? Is it worth visiting itself? Oh, that's a really good question. So is it worth traveling 7 days and 6 nights on a train or flying for 16 hours, which is I think what you're doing once you have a stopover to go to Vladivostok? No, I wouldn't make that journey just to go to Vladivostok. However, is it worth going to Vladivostok instead of Ulaanbaatar or Beijing? I kind of want to say yes. Like it was not what I expected at all. As I sort of mentioned this earlier, like I had this idea in my head like it was a tiny fishing village, and I don't really know why. I think it's just because it feels so far away. You kind of think to yourself, well, what else can it be? Like it's such a stupid, naive assumption. But I had it. That's what I thought. And actually, it's a really lovely city. It's kind of fascinating because it felt far more European as a city than any of the other Russian cities that we'd visited along the way. So we'd gone that far east and it was like being back again. Or it felt, at the time I remember thinking it felt a bit like San Francisco. I couldn't really tell you what it was. That was just the idea that came into my mind. It's got lovely tree-lined boulevards. It's got really nice pedestrianised bits. It's on a really pretty bay. It's on water on, I don't quite know how it works. It has water on two sides, or maybe there's like a kind of just a pretty bay. I'm not entirely sure, but no, it is. I think it's on a bay, so you've got a much nicer, sort of smaller covered bit, which I think in the summer possibly people may even swim in, and then you've got the big bay which is full of ships because it's a massive port. That's what it is. It's a port city. So there were warships in there. There were cruise liners. There were big cargo ships. There were like smaller people's personal boats. That was astonishing, how busy and how full the port was, and the size of the boats that were in there. There were so many of them, they were so huge. And I found that fascinating and eye-opening. Like, Robin, you're so stupid. Like, why did you think this is like some tiny little town? And of course it's a massive city. I mean, it's not massive in the sense of like London is massive. It's compact. But it's far bigger than I expected it to be. And there's a lot of things there that are very interesting. So, for example, we went to a North Korean restaurant and it was staffed by people from North Korea who were kept. I mean, I don't know if this is probably completely unethical. Like, I honestly don't know. We didn't know enough about it, but it's staffed by North Korean people who were brought over, like, by people from North Korea. Like, they weren't escapees from North Korea. Like, it was run by representatives from North Korea, and it was North Korean food, which is not dissimilar to South Korean food. And they wore traditional costume, and it was only women who served there. And whilst we were eating, they played guitar, and it was deeply alarming because they all had these very fixed smiles on their faces. Like, this the whole time just actually wasn't like that. It's more like, that's like a nice, pretty smile. And there was nothing there, and there were men like around the back, sort of watching what they were doing, and it was bizarre. I've never been anywhere like that. I don't know if anywhere else like that exists. But yeah, we went there one night. We went to a really fancy restaurant on the day that we arrived, and again, because the exchange rate was so good, it was really cheap for us. And the woman who served us there was so astonished that we had come from Moscow by train, which made me realize, that was the point when I was like, wow, okay, so really not that many people are taking the Trans-Siberian anymore, at least not at that time of year. More people are now going to Ulaanbaatar and Beijing. That she was so surprised that she bought us a free dessert like platter with "Welcome to Russia" written in big letters on it in chocolate writing, and all the puddings were free. And then she came out and presented us with a mug in a gift box as a present, and literally they were like taking photos of us, just being like, "Oh my god, these people are from London and they came all the way by train." And it was just so, it's fairly unusual, but probably I think possibly the best thing that I did in Vladivostock was actually, it was after Peter left. So Peter flew to Melbourne to his wedding, and I decided, and I just looked up, and I can't remember how I found out, but there's a university. So there's the University of Vladivostock, and I decided I wanted to go there. So I hopped on a bus, and this bus goes out to out of the city, and it's further out, and fewer and fewer people are on this bus. And then I got off, and it's so bizarre because in Vladivostok, the people in Vladivostok call their city the end of the world. That's what they refer to it as, and it doesn't feel like the end of the world when you're in the city, but then as soon as you leave, it really does. And this university is like this brand new building. Well, it's probably not that new actually, but it felt like it. It's all sort of glass and steel, but it's on this windswept bit of the city, and it's this sort of rocky outcrop. And I got off the bus and I went for a little walk on my own, and I stood and it was buffeting around, and it truly felt like the end of the world. It really did. It felt like there's no possible way that I can get any further than I am right now. And I was kind of right. But as I wrote some blogs about it at the time, and I remember thinking that writing in one of those blogs and saying that it felt like the end of the world, but then it depends on the way you look at it. You can turn that perspective around. It's the end of the world, but also it's the start of it as well. Why not look at it the other way around? Why does it have to be the furthest away point? Why can't it be the starting point? And London's the furthest away. But getting all sappy now. But that's why it was. That's what it has going for it. I think Vladivostok. It's an odd place, but it's incredible. And when I took the ferry. So I took the ferry to Korea from there, and on the ferry I met a woman from Vladivostock who was an English teacher, and she was traveling to Korea with some of her students, about 10 of her students. And it was so weird because we were so far east, we were further east than Korea, than all of China, and they're all white, of course. That's bizarre too. Like, the city is overwhelmingly white. And she'd never met a British person before. None of her students had ever met a British person before, and she was an English teacher, and it just blew her mind that I was a real English person on this boat. And I mean, like, it's just weird. I had not been in that position before to be like, yeah, I'm really not that special. I'm just a random English person. But they were really excited, and I was really pleased because I had brought with me some stickers of London, like little puffy stickers from Paper Chase, and everywhere we'd gone, oh, this is a good tip actually, they love giving presents in Russia. It's a real thing. People, everywhere you go, people give you presents, and so you need to give them a present back. And no one had told me this, so I am passing on this knowledge to you. If you do this trip, if you go to Russia, for the love of God, take presents. And it can be honestly the tiniest things, like a collection of magnets or keychains or pens or something like that, but something small that you can give, because that's people gave us, like someone gave us a calendar and someone gave us a keychain and someone gave us a magnet and someone gave us a mug, the people there, and someone gave us food and somebody gave us beer. And it was just like, as soon as they see you, they give you stuff. And it was humiliating because we didn't have anything. And all I had with me was this sheet of stickers, this paper chase sheet of London stickers. And so every time someone tried to give us something, I'd be like, would you like a sticker? And they were all looking at me like I was completely insane, and no one wanted them. I love stickers. I think stickers are cool, but apparently not very manly. And I was like, look, but it is a sticker of a taxi. How could you say no? And finally, when I took this ferry with these school kids from Vladivostock, and I was like, would you like a sticker? And they all wanted stickers. So finally, after 3 weeks, I was like, yay, someone wants my London stickers. So we all swapped some, and they gave me stickers off their phones, and they put them on the back of my phone, like the Big Ben stickers, and it was awesome. So some people might take the stickers, but not everyone. So yeah, take presents. Laura, you would have taken a sticker, Laura. Thanks, thank you. I thought that, yeah. If you like stickers, Korea. That's probably the real reason that I like Korea, is the stationery. The stationery is so good. It's amazing. It's so good. It's brilliant. It's all stickers and pens and everything. I quite literally bought so much stationery in Korea and Japan that I posted it home to myself. When I got home, I had a box of stationery and face masks awaiting me. And that is also a good tip. If you are on a long trip home, if you're on a long trip around the world, go somewhere, find great stuff, post it home. Because when you get home and you're like, I'm so miserable, I've just got home from the most amazing trip of a lifetime, and now I have nothing to live for. You do, because you have a box full of washi tape. And for me, that's literally a reason for living. So that's my other tip. That's my other tip. I don't know. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, I might say language-wise, if you might be wondering, do I need to speak Russian to take the Trans-Siberian? When I went there, I didn't speak any Russian. Funnily enough, I do now, because I enjoyed it so much. Learning, I am not a linguist in any stretch. I'm terrible at languages. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I enjoyed it so much because it felt like a code that you have to crack. It's kind of half the letters I recognized and half of them I didn't. That when I got home, I actually started learning it, and unfortunately my teacher wasn't that great, and like I say, I'm not a good student, but I can read it. So now I can read Cyrillic, and if I can learn Cyrillic, so can you. You don't necessarily need to speak it, and of course now most phones have this function that you can sort of Google Translate, automatic translate, that you can literally hold the phone over the writing and it'll translate it automatically for you, which is amazing. But if you want to learn Cyrillic, it's actually not that hard to learn the written language, and I reckon the written alphabet, and it will help. Like, you don't need to. We didn't speak it when we were there, but it will help you because you'll just recognize places. And I find it less stressful, reading and being able to like recognize city names and stuff. It just sort of, yeah, it comes to you there. I mean, in the 3 weeks that we were there, I was picking up what letters were in the English equivalent, but the language itself, I think, is not a comparatively, it's a moderate language. But yeah, it's a lot easier to learn Russian than it is to learn Chinese. Like, my God, I learned more Russian in the time that I have than I did Chinese. But yeah, so you can do it without it, but it would help. I wish I had printed out the Cyrillic alphabet before I'd gone. I didn't realize. I think there's about, I think it's like 33 letters or something in the Cyrillic alphabet. So you could literally just copy it out in the back of your book or something and take it with you. And that in itself would help a lot, just to recognize the names of cities that you're stopping off at. that would be a good recommendation. Oh, on board the train, they all differ. Some are fancier than others, some are better equipped than others. But as a general rule, every train will have a samovar, which is the hot water, like a kind of constantly boiled kettle thing. So if like Chinese trains, if you're used to traveling on Chinese trains, it's the same. So you can have a cup of tea or a pot noodle or whatever. That's always going to be there for you. Every carriage has what's called a provodnik, which is a carriage attendant. They're almost always women. They almost never speak English. They are like, as good as this is a gross generalization, but all of the ones that we met had this sort of very matronly quality about them, like really sort of like no nonsense, like they will tell you, but also caring. And especially like on the last day that we had this group of drunken Russian guys in our carriage, she kept coming in to check on us to make sure that we were okay, which is really lovely. And we just felt really well taken care of. So even though there's a language barrier there, it's really nice because there is somebody there to take care of you, and that's the first person that you'd go to every time you have an issue. The linen is provided, but you usually have to make up your own bed. There's sometimes a plug socket, but not always. So that was definitely hit and miss. And I suspect that's still the case now because it really depends on how new or old the train is. And they're going to keep running those trains until they literally fall apart. I mean, some of the ones that we went on were very old. And so if you have a power brick, like 100%, you're going to want to bring that with you. I mean, if you don't have one, buy one. You're not going to have that much access to it. Obviously, there's no Wi-Fi or anything like that. That's so, yeah, in terms of electricity, that's what you've got. Some have a dining car, others don't. Some of them provide meals. You'll see that when you book, it'll give you the option to add it on. Wherever there was a hot meal option, I always took it when I was booking. And because I thought, it's going to be worth it. It wasn't that expensive, but honestly, it's not really worth it. And like the further away we got from Moscow, the worse the food got. So it was never great, but it was steadily worse as we went. And you don't have an option, and they just sort of, you just sort of get handed it. I would say you do much better to do a big shop in each town and just take food with you, and that's what most people do on the trains. But we pilfered away tea bags wherever we went. So wherever we had the option to take a tea bag, we just took it with us from hotel rooms and stuff like that. And there was always a good supply of tea. If they offer you a tea or a coffee on the train, you have to pay for it. That was a mistake we made. Like one of the very earliest trains, they came around and the provodnik was like in Russian, she was like, tea, coffee, and we were like, oh, thanks very much. Wow, this is so amazing. And she's like, chocolate, and we're like, oh my god, how great, thanks so much. Yes, I'll have a Kit Kat. And we were like sitting there eating it, and then she came back and asked us for the money, and we'd literally just been saying to each other like, wow, this service is so great. Can't believe we got a free cup of tea on here. How brilliant. It wasn't free. It wasn't free. It never is. You obviously, like, what a stupid thing to assume, but yeah, you will pay for it. But it's really, I like it because they give it to you in it's in a glass, but with a sort of really pretty sort of fretwork metal, quite intricate metal things. It's very, you get them everywhere. They're very cheap. They're not expensive to buy, but it's just really nice. And they wash the glass thing, and you just the little metal handle. Feels very fancy. I like to feel fancy. It's very nice. What do we hear? I'm pleased to hear that you were British enough to always have tea with you. Yes, that's true, always. And I've always got a tea bag somewhere. But it wasn't until I got to Mongolia, actually, I was craving like tea with milk, and that's just not a thing you get in Asia. It's just not common. When I lived in China, there was one supermarket in the city that sold milk, and we would have to like travel across town to get this milk, and in sort of long life horrible milk. And then we used to reuse our tea bags with this milk so that we could like go through it, and it was really special. And I miss that a lot. That's like the thing I miss the most, a proper cup of tea. I'm so British, it's disgusting. It's so embarrassing. I'm really half British, but I feel like it's there, it's in my heart, you know? I'm just trying to think if there's anything more practical that I can tell you about going. I'm not sure. So do you have if there's any other questions? Um Oh my gosh, I said in my introductory video I would tell you where to find the world's largest Lenin head, and the answer to that is Ulan-Ude, which is the town that we went to after Irkutsk. So if you take the Trans-Mongolian or Trans-Manchurian, you will not see the world's largest Lenin head, and maybe that alone is worth the trip to Vladivostok. I couldn't possibly say. It's a very big head. Yeah, it's very cool. That's where you find it. Told you about the man with the giant knife. Oh yeah, Laura's just put that up on the chat at the side. I kept a blog until I got to the end of Myanmar, of Burma. I didn't keep it any further than that because it took such a long time to keep it. I was running massively behind, so that's where I was by the time I finished my travels, and then I just sort of ran out of steam. But theflashpacker.info is my blog, and so it's still there, so you can see it. And on the map page, there's a list of everywhere that we went and everywhere that we stopped. So if you can contact me on the blog if there's anything that you think about later, or if there's anywhere that I went to that you would like to know if you should or shouldn't go. I will be very honest with you. There's nowhere that I went on my trip that I wish I hadn't gone to. The country that I found the hardest was China, which was weird because I had lived there and I went there thinking, this is going to be awesome. I'm just coming back here to a country that I know, but my God, it had changed so much. It had been about, I think it was like 13 or 14 years in between me living there and going back again. And it was like unrecognizable. And it's not an easy country to travel around at the best of times. It was harder with the memories. And it wasn't easy. I don't know. I'm not sure I would go so far as to say I don't recommend it, because I think that's unfair, because it's just my experience of it. And there's so much about China which is brilliant and fascinating and and misunderstood. But it was the most difficult country that we traveled in, definitely. But it is what it is. It's still awesome. It was an amazing trip. And the Trans-Siberian is a great train to do. And now I just have to do the Orient Express, and then I'm fine. Actually, I'm not fine at all. There's millions more that I want to do. Oh, as Laura saying, what was difficult about China? That's a really good question, and it's kind of slightly hard to explain. I think it was difficult because I had been before and I knew what it had been like. And so when we traveled around, it was partly me and partly the way that the country had changed. So when I had traveled at 18, I think, I was woefully naive for a start, and I had never traveled before, and I was just like throwing myself into everything, being like, yeah, of course, just do it. And I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what I was seeing. It was a different way of traveling in those days. You know, we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have the internet. Well, the internet existed, but you had to go to an internet cafe to do it. So sort of everything was done based on the Lonely Planet. And not many people were traveling there. Not many tourists were traveling there. And it was pre-Olympics, and not many people were there. And then by the time I went there in 2016, the Olympics had changed a lot of things. China's economy had just skyrocketed, and they had built all of these ghost cities and things. But the weirdest thing, the thing I found the strangest, and I think the thing that sort of, for me, kind of represented what had changed, was that in the interview, so when I had been there, we traveled on the local trains. For better or worse, that was the only trains that existed. The trains that went between these places, the longest train journey we did was about 56 hours. It was very normal to travel between Beijing and Shanghai was 24 hours. That was the kind of distances and times that you were looking at. And in the intervening time, they put in this bullet train network, and it wasn't fully complete. It might be now, I'm not sure. But they created this network, and it was amazing because it was astonishing. It was a complete game changer. It was allowing, you could suddenly do what used to be a 24-hour journey. You could do it in like 5 hours. Like it was insane how fast this train was going and what you could do. But what I hadn't realized was they built new train lines, new train tracks. They built new train stations, and they were talking about it as if it was the only way to travel. And it was ubiquitous. So in the Lonely Planet that we had, or the Rough Guide, I can't remember which one I had then, it only talked, I remember it only talked in the vocab bit about how to ask for trains for either first class or second class. And that was the first kind of inkling that I got, because I was reading that and I was like, that doesn't make any sense, because the classes in China are soft sleep, hard sleep, soft seat, hard seat. That's the classes in China. And according to the guidebooks, it was like, no, it's only first class or second class. And then when we were staying in hotels and we'd ask them where the train station was, they would point us to the bullet train station out of town, and I'd be like, but what about the slow train? And they'd be like, no, it's like, it just doesn't they just make mayo, which is like nothing, like there is, like, it doesn't exist. And I was like, this is so weird. And it wasn't until I can't remember where we were and where we had to go to, but there was a town that we really wanted to visit. That was it. So there was a town that we particularly wanted to go to. Where it was? We actually went to Wuhan, now famous for coronavirus. We did go there. But the only way that we were able to get there or away from it was on this slow train, which essentially we accidentally discovered because I remembered in Xi'an where the old train station was, because I had been there 13 years previously. And we went there and it was still there. And I was like, oh my God, these stations still exist, but they're pretending like they don't. And essentially it felt like they had the government had created this glamour of saying, like, look how great everything is in China now. Everyone is living a great life. And they'd built this like a glamour, like a witch's glamour of these bullet trains and life that was amazing. And instead of clearing up all of the problems that were happening, they just taken this glamour and just pushed it down on top of what already existed. And so then everyone in the rest of the Western world is looking, going, my God, China's so developed, it's so amazing, everything's great, it's so wonderful. But actually underneath, there's still this massive undercurrent of poverty and people suffering and people being oppressed and terrible human rights and incredibly slow and dirty and difficult trains, but they still go to other places. And it was like the towns that these slow trains went to were just no longer accessible to tourists or to Westerners, to non-Chinese people. You just couldn't go there because they just told you that there was no train to get there. But there was a train, and some of them we went on, and they did exist. And it's hard to explain any more than that. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense, but that's how it felt. It felt dishonest, I think. It felt, and it wasn't the individual people. It was obviously a decision that had been made from on high. And everyone I knew who was there at the same time as me or similar time who'd gone to Beijing was like, oh, I love Beijing. It was really great. And I was just thinking, is it because I'm looking for something that I know exists? And sometimes I saw glimpses of it and it was still there. I'm not sure. I haven't spoken, actually. I really should chat to, I don't know if Joe is still online, but Joe was here earlier, who lived in China at the same time as I did. So I know Laura because we both did the same gap year charity. Laura was in Namibia and I was in China. We met on our training course, but I haven't spoken to anyone who lived in China when I did who has been back since. And I would love to know if anyone has had a similar experience to me. And it's just difficult. It's just difficult in a lot of ways because in my experience of living there, teaching Chinese people and with Chinese friends, they weren't encouraged by teachers and by their parents to think. to think outside the box, to think for themselves. Like, it's just not something which the government wants them to do. So it wasn't really a trait which was encouraged very much. And so if we went to a hotel or a station and we asked a question and they didn't know the answer, it was not in line, unlike in other countries where, you know, for example, at the train station, if you say, can I take this train to this city? And they say, no, that train has left. If you were in another country, if you're in the UK and you met someone who was helpful, they would usually say, but if you go to this place, then you can join onto this other train and you'll get there and you'll only be 2 hours later. Whereas in China, when we went back this time, they'd just be like, no, you can't go. The train's gone. And that was it. And you sort of, so everything was so much work. And that's why it was tough. That's why I struggled on going back this time. But that doesn't mean it's not a country that it's a country you shouldn't visit. Possibly shouldn't visit because of the human rights violations, and you don't want to be supporting that. But, you know, I visited Myanmar as well, and although this was pre-Rohingya, but even so, it's really difficult. As with anything, traveling is a mire of problems. It's not a simple solution. Probably, and drawing to a close now. I don't want to be. I mean, I already have rambled for a really long time. Yeah, you can say that again. Nora says, yeah. It's really complicated. I'm sure there's a huge number of things that I have messed up on traveling over the years and will continue to do. But there's far more to be gained from going than staying. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad that you've enjoyed it. That's really nice. I hope that you do. I hope that you do consider doing this trip. Obviously, now is not a normal time. I don't know when it'll be possible to go again, but I really hope that you would consider putting this onto your itinerary. Most people now do the Trans-Mongolian, but there is so much from the Trans-Siberian the Trans-Russian that I loved. And I do think that Vladivostock is a sort of hidden, strange city worth visiting. It was an awesome ramble. I will take that. An awesome ramble. If you're still here and you're not subscribed to Adventure Queens, then please subscribe. It's a great channel with loads of helpful stuff from all of the wonderful Adventure Queens that we share. We are all part of. So thank you for letting me talk. It's been really nice to remember, to reminisce, and to talk to myself with no interruptions. It's amazing. I mean, it's great. I've been self-isolating alone in my house, so I sort of forgotten what my voice sounds like. So this has been really wonderful. And I will remember your wise words and do my first non-air travel journey on Saturday. Oh, yay! Oh my gosh, how exciting! I really hope you do enjoy it. I really want more people to enjoy the process of the traveling and not just see it as the necessary evil of getting from A to B. The more you see that as the exciting part of it, then you get to enjoy the whole thing as your holiday, as your trip. You know, it's not like, oh, I've got to travel to get there. The whole bit's exciting. And that's awesome too. So enjoy, Laura. Have a wonderful time. Yes, and you can contact me if anyone. I'm on Twitter at Robin Jankel. And if you want to follow me, if you want to get in touch and ask any questions, then you're very welcome on my blog. The Flashbacker, deeply out of date, but I do still check it. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, get in touch if you want to. Subscribe to the channel, and I will sign off now and wish you all a wonderful evening. Happy August. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. Long may it continue. And travel as widely as possible, as slowly as possible. Those are my final words. Farewell.